So on to tonight's program on conservation ranching. Matt Allshouse is with us. He comes to Audubon, California from Wyoming, and he has been the conservation ranching program manager for the state of California since September 2019. As a rangeland ecologist, he has 13 years of experience associated with land policy, management, and science. Matt previously served as ranch manager for Antelope Springs Land and Cattle in Wyoming, as a biologist for the Peregrine Fund in Belize and Guatemala, directing conservation field research, and as ecologist with the consulting firm Tri-Hydro Corporation, focusing on restoration ecology. Matt holds a dual bachelor's degree in environmental natural resources and rangeland ecology and watershed management from the University of Wyoming. So welcome, Matt. We are really looking forward to learning more about how grazing and ranch management can benefit both ranchers and grassland birds alike. Thank you.
Hey, Judy. Hey, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I guess I don't need to introduce myself. It was a kind of a lengthy one, but yeah, I've been working throughout the Intermountain West and Central America on rangelands for quite a while now. And, coming out to California made me realize a few things. And the first one is it's a hotspot for diversity, not just biological diversity and diversity of these different ecosystems, but it's economic diversity and it's cultural diversity. And so there's a lot of things that tie into our program that aren't necessarily associated with just the diversity of the land. The bird diversity here just blows my mind completely. So I wanted to start by thanking Morro Bay Audubon and Morro Coast Audubon, and thanking Wendy for reaching out to me all the way back in June. That was really nice. It sounds like you guys have had some pretty great talks over the past few months. And the volunteer work that you guys do between Sweet Springs and between the shorebird surveys and the Christmas bird counts, and now that the advocacy with Oso Flacco, it really helps, and you guys on the ground are the ones making a difference. So thanks for having me. Also, Judy, I could reference some materials for you for this advocacy with Oso Flacco that might tie into the new executive order 30 by 30. So feel free to talk to me after the presentation. Let me get it set up here for everyone. So I'm going through a few technical difficulties here. Can you guys see my screen?
Hey, Matt, looks good.
Okay, thanks. I couldn't hear anyone. So I'm the program manager for the conservation ranching program here in California. The program started about 8 years ago in the Midwestern United States to stem the loss of grasslands and the conversion of grasslands in the tall grass and short grass prairies. Since then, it's expanded throughout the Intermountain West, and now we're starting this pilot program here in California. So the program is designed to stem the conversion of grassland ecosystems and to improve ecological function of rangeland by partnering with ranchers to transition to a more regenerative grazing approach via this ranch certification program. So the program purpose is to create these market-based incentives to improve grassland bird habitat and prevent it from being converted. And the reason for it is that a new study that was recently published last year finds these steep and long-term losses across virtually every group of birds in North America. And the interesting piece of that is the biome that has the largest decline in bird species is this grassland biome. So in total, over the past 50 years, bird populations have declined by about 3 billion individuals. That's really hard for me to wrap my head around. And so if we take a look at the percentage of those total populations that's been lost over the past 50 years, grassland birds have declined by 53%. That's over half of all grassland birds have just disappeared. So this is really staggering. And this is kind of why the program was developed. Audubon last year published a bunch of comprehensive data that they collected, and they took a look at every individual species of bird in North America and how their populations are going to be affected by climate change. And it took into account different threats that are caused by climate change, whether that's sea level rise or crop expansion, urbanization, this extreme spring heat, fire, and spring droughts. And they took a look at an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius and an increase of 3 degrees Celsius, and then projected that on how birds utilize different types of habitat. So it really takes these compounding threats and then takes a look at how birds will hopefully adapt or move or lose habitat in response to these threats. So if we take a look at the western meadowlark, this iconic bird species lives here in California, with a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the western meadowlark is going to lose all of its range in California. So it's very vulnerable, and a lot of species here in the state are very vulnerable. So about 47% of California species are vulnerable to this change. I'm going to keep going back to the western meadowlark, and while I'm presenting, I'd like people to think about, when they think about grasslands, what is like the iconic species of grasslands here in California? And I ask that because I want a mascot that can be the face of conservation ranching for California. And I think it'd be really cool to get input from you guys. And like, if we publish something, I want like this bird front and center. So I think it's kind of interesting that the western meadowlark's Latin name is Sternella neglecta, because they are being neglected in a lot of areas. So they're definitely not parting. Also, think about the western meadowlark. It's one of my favorite species because it's the state bird of Wyoming, but it's also the state bird of quite a few other places. So if people know other places that it's the state bird of, feel free to drop them in the chat. It's 6 other states. Taking a look at the eastern meadowlark, there's been a little more comprehensive research on their population. And you know, they don't exist here, but they do exist in some of the other areas our program is working in. So when I think about this and try to wrap my head around how many birds have actually been lost, it's about 3 in 4 eastern meadowlarks. So when you go out to an area and you see a bunch of meadowlarks, just imagine there being 3 times or 4 times that many meadowlarks there historically. So in survival by degrees, populations of the eastern meadowlark fell 3% per year from 1966 to 2015. So that's a cumulative decline of 89% of their population. It's just staggering. And one of the reasons is they're an obligate grassland species. So they nest on the ground, they forage on the ground, they eat off the ground, and they're a common bird in steep decline. So hopefully these trends don't persist. So that takes us to some of these major threats of grasslands. So California has roughly 40 million acres of rangelands. And these rangelands provide all sorts of resources. They provide food production, carbon sequestration, water infiltration, and they provide a wide range of habitat for species. So this historic California land use is under threat because about 20,000 acres a year of rangeland in California are converted to crops. And so we have those threats, and then we have these other threats of climate change and of aquifer depletion and of invasive species incompatible grazing, urban development. So the challenge here is that the majority of these lands are privately owned. So how do we affect change on private lands? This also, though, gives us an opportunity to make change that is economically and ecologically sustainable. So we know grasslands are facing a crisis. How do we achieve this significant lasting changes at a scale that can actually reverse these population declines in grassland bird species? We must connect management practices for this livestock demand, for healthy food and sustainability, to these ecosystem functions. One thing that we know is that grasslands evolved with grazers. So grasslands throughout North America co-evolved with grazers and being grazed. Birds also evolved with grazers, and they evolved and adapted to live in these systems that were periodically grazed. So there's this evolutionary relationship between grazing animals and grasslands and ecosystem function and birds. It's a critical piece of this equation that also ties into mitigating climate change. So cattle can mimic these functions that bison and other grazing ungulates normally took on the land. So they restore this role by restoring ecosystem function and these nutrient cycling, rebuilding soils, as well as conserving water and fueling different types of plant growth. This is how Audubon developed this market-based approach for conservation. So I'm sure the majority of you are familiar with how Audubon started, but it was a market-based program because so many people were using egret feathers in women's hats. And so by rewarding people for not using egret feathers in hats, it was market-based. And so this market-based approach recognizes and incentivizes this conservation beef. It can empower consumers for conservation. It rewards good practices to the ranchers, and it could be this path to a sustainable future. So when Audubon first rolled the program out, they sent out a survey to most of our chapters asking if people would like to see more options available in the beef market that protect the environment. And the majority of them obviously got back and said, yeah, they'd like to see this option. Well, the grass-fed beef market has expanded exponentially over the past several years. So it's a grass-fed program. And so we found a lot of support for this beef-friendly certification just on the market-based side. A lot of people had concerns with the use of hormones and antibiotics as well, and animal health and welfare, and environmental sustainability. So this market-based approach basically connects certified ranchers to willing retailers that sell to these conscientious consumers. Right now, Audubon on a national scale has invested a lot in the program. So we have this market appeal and value added to the product. So we have our communications and marketing team working on that side. Right now we had field staff in Missouri, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, and now me here in California. One thing that we do is we develop habitat management plans for all of our participating ranchers. We cover the cost and organize all of the monitoring that needs to happen on all these ranches for vegetation, soils, and point counts for bird monitoring. And we cover the cost of the certification through our third-party auditor. And then we have this national staff working on our science team and our working lands program. And we hire consultants that assist with marketing and supply chain linkages that the livestock industry can be difficult to tie into if you're not familiar with the industry. So right now we're operating in 14 different states, and this map hasn't been updated for a while here in California. There's actually, besides those 2 dots, there's 15 other dots here in the state. So 14 states, 96 ranches total enrolled for about 2.3 million acres. Restaurants and retailers, this is expanding, but there's a lot of online resources as well. We have this goal of 2.5 million acres in the next year, and I think we're actually going to meet and exceed that goal. And I'll talk a little bit more about California later in the presentation. What no one realized when we brought this program to California was the grass-fed industry and the beef industry is inherently different in California because the ecoregions are different, and it's so biodiverse that the majority of operators can't just have one home ranch and run a grass-fed operation on that single ranch. They need to have different properties in different areas based on the precipitation gradient throughout the state. So I enrolled 4 operators or ranches as part of this pilot program, but those 4 operators have 17 different properties across 6 counties, and it's almost 70,000 acres. So right off the bat, we kind of exploded here with just 4 operators, but it spread half the part of Northern California, which is cool, but it's also daunting in a way because of the information that we need to collect at each of these places. I'm going to dive a little bit into our program protocols, and I'm sure folks may have questions as I go through. And in the past, I usually end up answering the questions as I go through. So I'm going to hold off to the end to have any questions, but please keep those in mind as we go through these. So the program is based on these program protocols, and it's almost like the Bible of the program. It's what everyone has to follow to meet the objectives of the certification. And they're based in 4 different things: this habitat management piece, forage and feeding, animal health and welfare, and environmental sustainability. So for habitat management, this is kind of what makes our program unique compared to other beef certifications, is that we develop a specific habitat management plan with ranchers for each ranch in the program. And so these habitat management plans really take a hard look at what's on the ground already at these places and how we can improve upon that based on how we can selectively graze certain areas. We take a look at the current avifauna that they have on their place and how we can provide habitat for those target species. We also develop a list of focal species that we want to manage for and monitor. It's big on these cycles of disturbance that can mimic the mosaic nature of natural prairies. And I'll just add a little note. I know I talked a lot about bison and how these grasslands evolved with grazing ungulates. In California, bison went extinct a long time before they did in the Great Plains. So I've done a bunch of research to take a look at how these grasslands evolved with other grazing ungulates, and we can hop into that at the end of the presentation. But I can say that California has evolved with grazing ungulates and these cycles of disturbance and recovery. We also look at this regenerative grazing approach with holistic planned grazing. And then we tie the habitat management plan back into our monitoring data to see if what we're doing on the ground is actually improving populations and improving nesting habitat. And if it's not, then we can be adaptive and change management practices. The second piece is forage and feeding. So with forage and feeding, we're an all grass-fed program. And this is a little controversial for some. Some people like the taste of grain-finished animals. I'll call it conventional. But the reason that we're all grass-fed is because of point source pollution that comes from feedlots. And it's too bad because there's a lot of ranchers and grazers that are part of a conventional program that are doing great things on the ground, that are doing really good things to build soil carbon and good things for bird and bird habitat. But on feedlots, they usually feed them corn and soy. And that corn and soy comes from land that was historically grassland that got tilled and is now growing corn and soy to feed cattle in feedlots. So that's one of the reasons that we're all grass-fed, grass-finished. In pasture feeding has to be dispersed. No antibiotics or hormones are allowed as part of the program. Obviously, if an animal is sick or injured, we want these operators to use antibiotics. They just need to be ear tagged from that point, and then they can't be sold into the program as certified bird friendly. Also, there's no feed allowed with animal byproducts, as well as a fairly large list within the protocols, but those are the main ones. So animal health and welfare, animals have to be in open pastures, unconfined, have body health scores of 4 to 7, a big list of how they're handled, and they also have to be slaughtered in a USDA or state inspected slaughterhouse. And lastly is environmental sustainability. So this really ties into broadcast spraying of herbicides and pesticides, neonicotinoids, protecting critical riparian habitat, critical wildlife connectivity areas, important bird areas, and nutrient management within different systems. Right now, we contract out the verification and have the Food Alliance actually apply the certification for the program. So there's an initial audit that's done for the ranch that includes a site visit, review of the HNP, and then there's a long list of monitoring protocols and other things that the Food Alliance verifies before certification comes out. After that, an operator submits their application, and if they meet all the required protocols, they get this certification letter. After they get the certification letter, they can then use the Audubon Green Seal on their packaging that can get them a premium for their product. I'll dive into ecological monitoring here a little bit. So we monitor 3 different things on all of our ranches: soils, vegetation, and birds. Different states sort of sample different ways. We've partnered with Point Blue Conservation Science as part of their range monitoring network. So we have partner biologists from Point Blue and the NRCS collecting our data as part of the range monitoring network protocols that can tie into these big comprehensive data sets here in the state. So for soil health, we monitor texture, soil organic carbon, bulk density, and water infiltration. We monitor these different things because they're all inherently connected to one another. The more soil organic carbon, the lower the bulk density and the higher the water infiltration. And this is really important for nutrient cycling and function and carbon sequestration in the soils. For vegetation, we monitor ground cover, diversity, and composition. So this can help us draw conclusions about how grazing is affecting these historic climax plant communities over time. California is a lovely place to live, and the plants have found out about that. So, the majority of the grasslands here in California are composed of non-native annual species that have naturalized themselves in these systems. And so really taking a look at that and tying in how invasive species can be mitigated through grazing is one of our goals. On the vegetation piece, I can't move forward too much without mentioning fire. Obviously, this was a horrific and historic fire year here in California, and we like to keep that in mind. Bobcat Ranch, Audubon's Bobcat Ranch is one of our demonstration sites for the program in Yolo County. It's about 7,000 acres, and it has a fairly low return fire interval for how often it burns. But this year, 80% of the ranch burned. Ranch manager Dash Wiedhofer did a really good job at mitigating some of the fires. He worked with CAL FIRE and did quite a few back burns that saved the majority of the infrastructure on the place. So we know there's this risk associated with fire and ecosystem resiliency and return intervals on fire. And so for a lot of our programs, we'd like to use grazing as a management tool for fire and partner with CAL FIRE to decrease this risk. It also gives us this opportunity to monitor how fire affects carbon in the soils, since we are monitoring soil carbon. And it creates this opportunity for us to work with different agencies and to take a look at how these systems are being affected and will be affected into the future. And then lastly, what everyone's been waiting for is bird monitoring. So we do point count surveys on all of these ranch locations. And for each ranch location, we've developed specific eco-regional protocol. And because California has so many eco-regions, we want to develop focal species that we manage for specifically based on the habitat that exists in those areas. And this is just an example of some historic data of grassland focal species detections at Bobcat Ranch. Our program has shown significant increases in overall biodiversity and in bird density at some of our pilot sites in the Midwest. I'd really like to see the data come back from California and start sharing that with people. But in the Midwest, at one of our pilot sites, just in a few years, we saw 3 times the amount of biodiversity and 5 times the bird density at this location. So we want to make sure that we're choosing the proper areas to implement this program in the state. And, we don't want to move too fast. Right now, I am the only employee of conservation ranching here in the state. So we're moving kind of slow, but we're picking up speed. So we conducted a landscape prioritization that identified these spatially explicit priority areas in the state so that we can come up with ways to identify rangelands based on these criteria and maximize the conservation efforts for birds based on where we expand. So we took into account, as part of this prioritization, different physical and environmental, biological, ecological, and socioeconomic criteria to develop the model. These were the criteria. Physical factors were climate refugia, or the resilience of an ecosystem for climate change, water availability, and forage production, focal species ranges of the birds we're concerned about, riparian connectivity, critical wildlife habitat connectivity, overall statewide biodiversity, proximity to important bird areas. But then we also looked at this human side of it and how it could actually be implemented on the ground and how that would affect different producers based on distance to grass-fed markets, university agriculture programs, this distance to slaughterhouse, which is a big deal and the bottleneck for the industry, protected lands around the state, and land conversion around the state. So we took all of those factors and sent a survey to a panel of experts in this field, and they ranked each of those factors to one another. And from that data, we came up with a hierarchy model of what was most important. Some of the ones that came out on top for highest importance were wildlife connectivity, riparian connection, climate refugia, biodiversity. And so once each of those got a 0 to 1 ranking, we used the geospatial data that we have for each of those and imposed that on a map of the state to come up with priority areas. And so this was the final map that came out, and I love maps. I think it's really cool. I think we should use caution moving forward with the data on this map, but it's a really cool tool to identify areas that could be, have great potential for inclusion in the program. So from the map here, you can see that the majority of the Central Valley is red or very low, and that's because it's already converted into agricultural land. Some of the areas that stood out to me as green or very high are this Central Coast area. So areas where you guys work and where you guys live, this Central Coast area is a place we'd really like to expand. So next steps for the program are add more certified ranches to the market, but then link them between one another. We want them to brand their programs. And so a lot of these beef producers have their own brand and they sell their own brand, but then they can add that Audubon seal to their packaging. Also expanding retailers. So we want to make the product available. The only way the program is going to work is if people recognize and purchase this product. So in doing so, we frame this conservation story for consumers through marketing and through outreach and through chapter presentations like this one. And so we want to connect consumers to certified ranches and directly to the market. So we're working on that market side and developing a website and rancher profiles, and then using adaptive management for these places to really use that data just as a powerful tool to explain the program to people, as well as to do better things on the ground. Part of our future vision is this Audubon certification seal is universally recognized as the standard for eco-sustainability. The market is really hard when looking at certifications. There's all sorts of certifications out there, and not everyone knows what they are. There is a GAP certification, which is Global Animal Partnership. There's the AGA, which is American GrassFed certification that certifies animals are grass-fed. There's USDA organic certification. There's the Audubon bird friendly certification, as well as a bunch of others. The one thing that Audubon certification takes into account that no one else does is the habitat management plan piece and the habitat piece, which we think is the most important part. But we also take a look at all of the other certifications and what they cover. And so we cover that as well. One other neat thing that I forgot to mention is that our certification is completely free to any participating rancher. Every other certification a ranch or brand has to pay for. We provide this free to our ranchers and provide them the necessary resources for the habitat management plan and cover the costs of the Food Alliance certification if they enroll in the program. And it's not a mandatory program. They can do it as they want to or leave as they want to. But we want to empower these ranchers as this sort of new generation and give them the skills and market support to where they can lift the bar a little and start implementing these practices, and also see those benefits on the ground when it comes to forage availability. So recognition for the potential of regenerative grazing practices is super important, and we want to be able to use it as this conservation tool that makes working lands part of this climate solution. And I think it really ties into the executive order that just came out for 30 by 30. It also ties into the market appeal of these local food systems. So we want to connect these ranchers to people who live locally and people that want to buy these products locally, but also support rural communities. So the future vision is that grassland birds, pollinators, and wildlife will make a comeback. I wanted to thank some of our partners, in particular, the Wildlife Conservation Board of California. Right now, I'm operating under a grant that they gave us for the pilot program. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Wildlife Conservation Board. Also, Point Blue Conservation Science, we partner with them in a lot of programs for our Working Lands team, and they have amazing scientists on board. So thanks to Point Blue Conservation Science. Always the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the CARCD, the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. They really help us with outreach at all of their resource conservation districts where they have people stationed. And lastly, I'll open it up to questions, but I'd also like to give a shout out to our current participating ranches or operators. The Markegard GrassFed family has 5 different pieces of land between San Mateo County all the way up to Jenner Headlands. Joe Morris and Morris GrassFed, based out of Hollister, California. Lauren Poncha, who's pictured here from Stemple Creek Ranch out of Tamales. And then Scott Stone from Yolo Land and Cattle Company, who's our current leasee at the Bobcat Ranch.
Thanks, Matt.
Sure
if
thing.
you guys, anyone has questions for Matt, if you want to type them into the chat and we'll bring them up.
I just wanted to see what they were about. They're just going to take questions from people, but the overall premise is what they're doing in Audubon.
You want to leave the meeting?
Yeah.
Is there some of the questions that have come up, Matt, is Audubon reaching out to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo?
I have not reached out to SLO yet. I mean, obviously they have an amazing rangeland ecology program there, and a great agriculture program too. I haven't reached out to anyone at SLO, but you know, we're still in our infancy. So I mean, it would be amazing if we could get some grad students on this project. And I'd really like to expand with partnerships through Cal State and University of California.
Is there a mailing list that people could get on to learn more about certification?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have a mailing list, but we do have resources housed on our website, as well as resources for how to find these products.
Okay, is there a link that you can give us that we can post to people?
Sure.
How about, is there a minimum ranch average for ranch size average for involvement in the program?
So initially, our protocols here in California were that a ranch had to be at least 500 acres, and that was just based on our current capacity. That could change over time, and you know it's a lot different in the Midwest. So in the tall grass prairies in Missouri, where we're working, the ranch minimum is 100 acres. Here it's 500 acres, just because the amount of resources that we need to put into developing a habitat management plan and paying for all the monitoring and certification. Like I said, right now we have 4 operators and we're at capacity.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, how do antibiotics in grazing animals affect birds?
So the antibiotics is more along the lines of the animal health and welfare. So I don't know if there's a connection between antibiotics and birds. But you know, antibiotics in animal products are often given to them when they don't need them. And so that's one of the reasons that we don't want antibiotics in the beef or in the program is the certification. I don't know if there's been any links with antibiotics in birds.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions?
Does anyone have any bird species that they want to throw out there that they think of when they think of the most iconic grassland bird species of California?
The question is, oh, somebody put up burrowing owl.
Yes, I like that.
And
Loggerhead.
also loggerhead shrikes.
Shrikes are great. I love both of those ideas. Super charismatic birds.
Yeah, western bluebird.
Western bluebird and horned lark are part of our focal species.
Horned lark just came up also. And everybody votes for meadowlark.
Meadowlark for the win. Great. Yeah, those are really good suggestions. All of those are part of the focal species that we monitor for. You know, the poor horned lark, I mean, it just likes areas with bare ground. So we want more grass on the ground, but we definitely want to recognize them as an obligate grassland species.
I have to say, I had a recent experience with horned larks. I was out walking and I looked across the field and I saw a flock of about 200 horned larks take off, and the minute they landed, they were invisible.
Yep.
Ferruginous hawks just came up also.
Yeah, they're great. You know, part of the protocols that I'm developing in certain areas do target raptor species as well as migrating raptors. So, you know, we focus a lot on this nesting habitat because it's so critical. But another thing our science team is working on is looking at these migrations because the majority of these grassland birds are migratory and a lot of them don't spend their entire life in these areas. So if we want our program to be effective, we need to cover large tracts of the areas they nest, but also migrate through. So we're looking at partnerships in the Chihuahuan grasslands and the Sonora. We've been talking to folks in Mexico, as well as, you know, our program proponents in New Mexico and Texas, and kind of taking a larger look at these migrations and how many birds utilize these areas, not just during nesting season.
And here in San Luis Obispo County, we get mountain plovers out on the Carrizo Plains.
I've only ever seen a mountain plover once. I'd love to go out there. And I mean, it's funny, you know, it's a positive habitat indicator for mountain plovers, are barren areas around grazing. So
Yeah. What's the principal advantage, in your opinion, of purchasing Audubon certified beef over grass-fed beef certification from a consumer standpoint?
So, you know, one of the things during the Obama administration that happened is that through some joint trade agreements with different countries, animal products did not have to have country of origin labels on them anymore. So right now, 70 to 80% of grass-fed beef in the United States is sourced from Argentina, Brazil, and Oceania. So Australia, New Zealand mostly. And most people don't know about it because it's shipped here and then it's actually butchered here. And so if it's butchered in the United States, they can say that it's a product of the United States. So it's interesting. I went to Trader Joe's, my girlfriend went to Trader Joe's and got some grass-fed ground beef. And I was like, oh, it's not Audubon certified, but that's okay. You know, it's certified grass-fed. And I took a look at it and I did some research, and it's like, oh, it was butchered in Greeley, Colorado. Not bad. But it was a product of Brazil. I was like, wow, you know, they're cutting down the Amazon in Brazil to graze grass-fed beef that they're then shipping up here. So I think a real principal advantage when you see that Audubon seal is that you know where it comes from, and that you know the things that tie in. You know that there's this habitat management piece along with all of those other pieces of certification. So hopefully that's the principal advantage in my mind, is that we have that habitat management piece where we are really concerned with the ecosystem function and with wildlife in general.
So Matt, is there any beef in California yet that's commercially available?
So of our 4 producers, we have 1 ranch that has made it through their full certification. And right now, those other 4 producers are still enrolled and still being certified. So there should be the green seal on product here within the next few months here in California. I think supporting those producers right now is important. And I can send out a list to the group that has places you can get those. I don't think there's any down south yet. They do have stuff where you can buy it online, but I know some folks want to be able to see it in local retailers.
So one of the things, if you can send me the links to this material, we will put it on our website, and we will also post it in the comments under the when we post this on YouTube in the next day or so. So anything you email me, I'll put the links out there so people can get a hold of that information.
That would be great, Dave. I think it's really important to support local food movements, whether it's Audubon Conservation Ranching or Cal Poly Meats. It's really good to support locals that are doing good things. And that's one of the reasons that we want to expand throughout the state, is so that we can target markets in different places and it's available.
Okay. So Judy, do you want to wrap up?
Can I ask what Carmela's comment is referring to on the chat?
I'm not sure what Carmela's comment is.
Oh, there are 2 resource conservation districts in SLO County, one in Morro Bay and the other in Atascadero.
Right.
I've never been there and can't even pronounce it.
You got it. Mudhole in translation.
Mhm.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you being here. I did reach out to Cal Poly. I don't see them here. I see a couple of other people, ranchers who we did reach out to have sat in on this, which I'm really pleased to see.
That's fantastic.
So-
Feel free to share my contact information with those folks if you'd like to, Judy.
I will. I think one of the big threats I've seen in the 40 years I've lived in St. Louis County is I've watched the grasslands convert from grasslands ranching to grape production. And as that has crawled westward into the hills around Adelaide, that's of particular concern. So the other organization I reached out to was the Slow Land Conservancy that just purchased a large ranch called the Santa Rita Ranch. And I noticed one of the Land Conservancy people is with us tonight.
Excellent.
So I'm really pleased to see this become a push in California, because we're at a critical stage where if we lose our ranching grasslands, they're gone along with the birds. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you have any further questions, again, go to our website and we will have the link to Matt Allshouse and the Conservation Ranching Program through California Audubon on our website. So it's a pleasure. Matt, you ever come to San Luis Obispo, look me up and we'll show you all the great places.
I want to go birding down there really bad. So, and as soon as the certified wine comes out, I'll let you know that too. So you can have coffee in the morning and then beef in the evening and then certified wine after.
I love it. Well, that's another great push. We have people who are very interested in the wine production also around here and interested in making it sustainable. So thank you very much. And I hope to see all of you, plus all your friends and relatives at our next program for the Birds of San Luis County. Matt, you will love it. It's the best photographers in the county. And it's put together into a slideshow with music. Incredible bird photography.
I'll put it on the calendar.
Yeah, third Wednesday of the month, and I'll send you an invite. But I hope to see you all for that. Dave Keeling's been working extremely hard to put that together, and it seems like it's going to be another great program. It's I believe, his 12th year. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. If you have any further questions, feel free to direct them to me at the Morrow Coast Audubon Society website, and we'll see if we can point you in the proper direction. Thank you so much. See you all
Thanks.
next month.